Welcome to Tarrant County College Northeast Campus Microbiology Laboratory. We are pleased that you have chosen the Northeast Campus for your laboratory sciences, and we will do our utmost to make this a safe and positive learning experience. In order to make your experience in the laboratory a safe and productive one, we have provided a list of important safety rules that must be followed when working in the microbiology laboratory. Please keep in mind that other safety rules may be included at a later date and will be discussed at that time. Following this presentation, you will be asked to take a short, online, 10-question test over these rules. Upon passing this test, you will be asked to sign, date, and hand in a copy of these rules that will be kept on file in the department office. Successfully passing this test will allow you to continue working in the laboratory. Rule number 1 requires you to wash your hands upon entering and before leaving the lab. We use an antimicrobial soap which contains chlorhexidine gluconate and which is located at the wash stations. Wash your hands for at least 30 seconds and carefully rinse with tap water and then towel dry. Rule number 2 requires you to always wash the tabletop with disinfectant upon entering and before leaving the laboratory. Use the squeeze bottle on the tray to spray the tabletop and then carefully towel it dry. Rule number 3 requires you to place all coats, books, backpacks, and purses under the table. Avoid placing these items in the walkway and make sure that no unnecessary material is placed on the laboratory table. Rule number 4 requires you to help keep the laboratory and especially the wash basins clean. Make sure to discard non-biohazard materials such as paper towels, notebook paper, and Kleenex appropriately in the trash containers. Rule number 5 requires you to help keep all unauthorized people such as friends and family members out of the laboratory. Only enrolled students and faculty members are allowed in the laboratory. Rule number 6 requires you to wear an appropriate lab coat which should extend below your waist and has sleeves to protect your clothing. In order to protect your legs from spills, it is also strongly recommended that you wear pants or a dress that covers your knees when seated. Shorts that do not cover the legs are no longer allowed in the microbiology laboratory. Scrub pants, in addition to the lab coat, is an acceptable cover for the legs and can be worn over other garments and stored in the student tray between labs. The lab coat must be stored in your student tray and is not allowed to be taken out of the lab unless it is disinfected or sterilized first. You must also tie any long hair back with a ponytail holder or other device. Rule number 6 also requires you to wear closed-toed shoes only. Flip-flops or any other open-toed shoe is not permitted in the laboratory. An extra pair of shoes may be stored in your student tray in the lab. Rule number 7. This rule states that you must keep your work area neat and organized. Place your incinerator directly in front of you and keep this space clear of all notes or books. Your lab manual should be placed on your right side if you're right-handed. As a general rule, never work over your notebook. Rule number 8. This rule states that you must not begin any work until you have received instructions. Make sure that you have read over the exercise and are sure that you understand the procedures. Ask questions when you don't understand the method or purpose of an experiment. Rule number 8 also requests you to turn off your cell phone and keep them stored during the lab period. Do not make, receive, or answer any text messages during the lab period. Cell phones, iPads, and laptops are no longer allowed on the microbiology lab table and must not be accessed during the lab period. Consult your lab instructor if an emergency situation exists. Rule number 9. This rule requires you to report any and all spills immediately. Biohazard spills can be very dangerous. Report the accident to the lab instructor immediately and then cover them with disinfectant. Rule number 9 also asks you to exercise extreme care when using incubators and refrigerators to avoid spills. Never remove specimens from the lab under any circumstances. All tube media used in the lab must be carried in the provided test tube rack or incubation cup. Do not carry or lift test tubes by their caps, since they could fall and spill and possibly break. Rule number 10. This rule requires you to properly discard all material used in the laboratory. Biohazard materials such as contaminated tubes and plates must be disposed of at the biohazard cart. Contaminated paper towels must also be placed in the biohazard bucket. Solid tubes, such as slants and deeps, must be placed in test tube baskets. Liquid tubes, such as broth tubes, must be placed in test tube racks so they do not spill over. Remember to always remove the tape from all tubes prior to disposal. Rule number 10 also reminds you that non-biohazard materials, such as paper towels used to dry hands and unwanted note paper, can be placed in regular trash containers. Rule number 11. This rule requires you to develop and use a good, safe, personal aseptic technique. Avoid any hand-to-mouth activities. Do not smoke, eat, consume drinks, chew gum, or place any objects in your mouth. Don't apply cosmetics or handle contact lenses while in the laboratory. Rule number 11 also requires that you make sure that all food and drinks are secured or properly stored while in the lab. Any food or drinks that are visible during the lab period will be immediately disposed of in the trash. Rule number 12. Report any and all accidents immediately to the lab instructor. Cuts, burns, or other accidents that occur during the lab must be reported to determine if further action is required, such as calling the nurse or other safety personnel. Take all precautions to avoid such accidents. Students with prior injuries or health problems must notify the instructor before the lab begins to determine whether the student can safely commence with any lab work. In some cases, signed doctor's notes may be required to allow the student to safely continue in the lab following a serious illness or other significant health problem. There are 3 additional rules that also have an important impact in our microbiology laboratory. Rule number 13. Mouth pipetting is absolutely prohibited. Mechanical pipetting devices will be available to perform any task involving pipettes. Rule number 13 also requires that used pipettes and other transferring devices be safely disposed of in beakers of disinfectant. Rule number 14. Safe handling and proper disposal of sharp objects and broken glassware must be followed. Non-biohazard broken items should be disposed of in the appropriate sharps container unit. Biohazard and biologically contaminated sharps and broken glassware must be disposed of carefully in the biohazard buckets at the discard cart. Rule number 15. Approved gloves may be required when working with hazardous chemicals, dyes, or pathogens. Consult the lab instructor for more information regarding the use of gloves in the lab. Rule number 15 also states that eye protection may be used at the discretion of the lab instructor. Although not a normal requirement, a special situation might arise which could warrant safety glasses. Your lab instructor will inform you if and when this arises. One final reminder: before you leave the lab for any reason, always remember to wash your hands with the antimicrobial soap. Or if there is an immediate need to leave, use the antiseptic hand sanitizer, which is by the door exit. It is also recommended that you wash your hands again when returning to the lab. Remember to also leave your lab coat or other cover-up in the lab when leaving the lab. This completes the DVD presentation on the Microbiology Laboratory Safety Rules. You are now ready to take a 10-question online test that will cover these safety rules. Upon your successful completion of the test with a score of no less than 80, you will then be allowed to continue with your microbiology laboratory experience. Once you have passed the test, obtain the official Microbiology 2420 Lab Safety Rules form, print your name, sign, date the form, and then record your lab day and time and instructor in the spaces provided. This signed form will be retained in the department office as our record of your successful completion of this presentation. Good luck, and thanks for choosing the Northeast Campus Microbiology program.